Our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about technology, define the business model concept, and we're going to talk about the establishing a relationship between the business model, which is the language, a term we use to describe, offer sort of a common language description of what a business is about and how it goes, offers to make money, and its correlate, the financial model. And we're going to try to illustrate some of this by talking about how the business model concept emerged over time. So, what's a business model? It's basically a story. It describes the rationale of how your organization creates, delivers, and captures value. Descriptions like B2B, B2C, fast food, restaurant, all of those communicate effectively what business you're in, and we all have a sort of intuitive idea of how that business might operate. Now, what's interesting about this notion of business model is that new models emerge in response to changing technologies and new demands placed on the business. Dell Computers, an example. In 1984, Michael Dell entered the computer market by installing 5 megabyte hard drives on IBM XT computers. Put my little icon there. Yes, that's what I bought. It's about a five megabyte hard drive for $250, and we thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Between 1984 and 1991, hard drive technology accelerated at an astonishing rate. So much so that by the early 90s, the small hard drives, the one there on the right, is an example of something that might fit in a laptop. The cost of that drive plummeted, its performance accelerated, and new models of hard drives are being introduced in approximately 60-day product life cycles. It got to the point where companies that once exported their manufacture to Taiwan in hard drives actually brought them back to the United States because they didn't simply have enough time to create a drive, ship it to Taiwan, get it manufactured, ship the product, and ship the product back to the United States in time to get them on the shelves. Simply put, they needed to be able to create, ship, and then move on to the next generation of hard drive within about a 90-day period, and you couldn't do that if you were selling overseas. That rapid pace of technological advance created problems for computer manufacturers. Dell started out like everybody else. You make a computer, you ship it to a store, it sits on a shelf, you sell it. With technology changing that fast, anything on the shelf was obsolete. Michael Dell decided to sell and build to order. To do that, he had to develop expertise in phone sales, in service, something no one ever had at the time. He had to come up with a mechanism for delivery, and in some ways, it coincided very neatly with the rise of FedEx, who he depended on highly, and with increased modularization in computer components. By putting those elements together, he grew into one of the largest and dominant computer producers in the world, a company that's still dominant today. 40 years later, there's still 30 years later, there's still a big player in the marketplace. So what are we talking about here? The business model concept itself, I'm going to go on to argue, is an innovation. It was created by the marketplace, in the marketplace by entrepreneurs to solve problems that they were experiencing. And the argument I want to advance is the notion of what a business model is, a description of how we go about doing business, what our methods for practicing business might be, changes with each generation. As technology creates problems, we come up with a solution, and then we turn around, and successive rounds of problems and solutions are then offered. And so in this fashion, technological advance changes business practices and morphs it over time in an ever increasing accelerated manner. In entrepreneurship and venture capital, here's a little bit of a story about what happened. For example, one problem that software manufacturers faced in the early 90s is that the cost of developing operating systems was astronomical, in large part due to the rising complexity and cost of testing of new software. This was a daunting cost, and software, frankly, could not be tested within a reasonable time frame. The solution they adopted was developed by Microsoft. It assumed that marketplaces were predictable, that technology was somewhat stable within a window, and that you could put stuff out there and that you could develop product and that it would be reliable over time. And Microsoft developed something called the beta test. They took software, they would release it in beta form to customers. Those customers would then use it, identify the bugs that Microsoft would then fix, and then ship version 1, 2, 3, or 4. Problem was, it took about a year for them to piss off all of their customers who were continually being bombarded with crummy software. So Microsoft developed this idea, the minimal viable product, to figure out when new versions of software should be released. And the minimal viable product was the minimum upgrade interval that was sufficient to merit testing by new customers. That turns out to be an important concept that we'll hang on to a little bit later. One of the next problems in the stack that illustrates this business model concept was during the dot-com boom. What happened was there was so much money flowing in the marketplace in this period, and it was absolutely astonishing how much money was flowing around. It was unbelievable. And venture capitalists were flush, the marketplace was flush. No one understood what the internet was about, what the dot-com opportunity was. There was lots of noise and lots of ambiguity, and people were coming in and offering up, submitting proposals for all sorts of business that no one knew what the heck they were. The term business model emerged out of the operations research literature and was quickly adopted by venture capitalists who used it to force applicants, people, entrepreneurs, to tell in very simple, plain language what their business was about and how they proposed to go about making money. So what we had here was a period of abundance. The marketplace was generous. They'd accept about anything. Tech was changing so fast people couldn't keep track of it. And so the business model concept emerged as a communications tool, and it is a device that focused attention on what was really important in the business. And that concept itself, the emergence of that concept, really changed how business plans were written. VC pitches changed literally forever. In about 1998, market conditions had changed in a radical way. Coming about 2001, had two things going on. The cost of new product development, particularly in software, was collapsing. But starting in 2001, capital was incredibly scarce. So you had two problems. You had shortage in programming talent and engineering talent. Capital was scarce. And so what it meant was that you could not afford to make a mistake in developing your software, just simply because the cost of correcting a mistake was so high. Second problem you had, the markets were no longer quite as generous, and while you could develop a product for customer one, you needed to you had to figure out how to get customer number two and develop your product in a way that would allow you to serve those customer needs. What happened was that the minimal viable product concept emerged as an execution strategy. It's implicit in a programming technology called Agile. It's part of something in customer development, then pioneered by Steve Blank. And the notion here was that instead of developing a highly refined product that met the needs of customer number one, what you would do is develop product in stages. And as those stages are refined, you would test each product on not only customer number one, but customer number two, and move on down the line, building out the product in stages. This allowed you to focus engineering talent on product development in segments. It allowed you to economize on that process. It was safer because you were testing product concepts in real time as they were coming off the line by establishing a closer relationship between the technologists, the engineers, and the customers. And it turned out to be a very powerful revolution in the approach to developing software and product as a whole. It's still around today. It's very much part of the lean startup concept, which we'll address a little bit later. But MVP, remember here, the notion was we're going to come up with a efficient way of developing products, strip some cost out of it, make sure we're using our engineering talent correctly, with the goal of minimizing the cost of mistakes. By 2004, demand had changed and the problems had changed in the marketplace, and again, in pretty important ways. The continued collapsing cost of new product development led to an opportunity to start building product in new and different and important ways. First, the ongoing problem, scarcity of talent, forced them to come up with new ways of developing software, and that turned into the LAMP stack, which were facilitating tools which companies used: Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. All of these different languages made it possible to develop software in a much more rapid, much more iterative, much richer, faster manner. We still had problems with capital, we still had problems with talent, we still had problems with number two. But because now the cost of programming had fallen and the cost of mistakes had been reduced, what you needed to do now was actually test ideas with real product in the marketplace in real time. And because of the cost of development was now low, people were now actually running around offering to build products on spec. There were techniques called sell, design, build, in which you went out and interviewed your customer, found out what problem they wanted to solve. You would go through and develop elaborate prototypes of what might be important. And finally, when you had enough customers around who were prospective clients for your product, you signed a contract and went ahead and developed it. So this whole notion here turned a world in which we originally had to have a product, real product, in order to determine whether or not a technology might be feasible, to a marketplace in which products are being developed that we assumed could be built but did not yet exist. The world changed again in 2008 with the introduction of the app and another practice called continuing integration. The problem was, of course, continue. We always want to create products that people want. Markets are a problem, but the cost of product development had gone down and the cost of reaching customers had actually become trivial. So before, in the prior generation, where you spent a lot of time working with customers trying to figure out what they wanted, because the cost of reaching and satisfying customer needs was difficult, and it was hard to figure out what would sell and how to best meet their needs. We were now in a place where you could reach out and touch any number of people at very trivial costs. That was recognized and exploited by Google, by Facebook, and others who started to rely much more on analytics, running A/B tests constantly. They started to use their customers and engage them directly in product development. And what that led to new models. Build, beta, pivot was basically you took a software product, you wrote it up. It might not look, you wireframed it, you put it out in the web, see what people said, and you would change it. With continuous integration, you could update and replace your product on almost a daily basis, if not intradaily. And because of that, you were actually developing your product with response, the engagement of your customers, and you're using analytics to help you make decisions about which feature to install, when, and use. That has led to, so the build, beta, pivot idea is out there. That was embraced somewhat in the lean startup model, and also this notion that we can break down a business into its components, start to re-engineer different pieces and put something else out there again, showed up in a concept called the business model canvas. So what do we have here? We've got the business model concept itself as a technology. It started out as a product in a very real sense, but developed into ways it allows us to engage richer ways of thinking about doing things. Real promise rises when new technology arises that allow you to do new methods of production, to do things that just simply were not feasible before. However, to understanding what's going to happen in consequence, that is two different things. The direct results of a new technology, how it physically changes, how what might immediately change, that's pretty easy. but grasping and understanding how a given change will unfold to change business practices is much more difficult to understand and also equally fascinating. So what happens is, as facilitating technologies have been introduced in the software marketplace, they've reduced the cost of launching a business to the point where it's almost trivial. And with each successive change in technology, it shifted the problem down the road. The build beta pivot idea of engaging customers to build products that dominated through about 2011, 2012. Actually, that model is now I think it's pretty much dead because customers are become wary of people exploiting their free labor and their willingness to give. Now you engage different ways of obtaining valid information from customers, and in that light, we see innovations like Kickstarter becoming a very important tool for validating and providing information to entrepreneurs about what customers might value. So we use the term business model and the way it's changed over time to understand the interface between technology and the change in business practice over time.